Okay, I think I'll go ahead and start now. I'm Judy Ledbetter, a longtime volunteer with the Charles City County Richard M. Bowman Center for Local History. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to our second virtual program. And it's a very special one. I don't know that Dr. Dance really needs an introduction with the crowd that's here today, but I'll venture one in any event. Maybe I know a few things that you don't know about Dr. Dance, but she's truly one of Charles City's really outstanding heroines of a sort. She, as you all know, was born in the Ruthville community, graduated from Ruthville High School. She started college at the age of 15 at Virginia State University, graduated at the age of 18, and went on to secure additional degree from the University of Virginia. She's had a wonderful career in academia, teaching at English at the University of Richmond and VCU. And she is the author of 14 books. The most amazing thing is, while most of us have spent this pandemic year weighing down the scale and doing certain other unproductive things, Dr. Dance, at the age of 82, wrote and published 4 books. And she's here joining us today to talk about one of those books. It's the second edition of her family history and biography called The Lineage of Abraham. And it's a tremendous contribution to the history of this county to have this all compiled and written down. And her expanded version, her new version, the second edition, takes the family further back in time and further around the country, basically. In addition, while the History Center does not sell products, we have offered to take a small number of books from Dr. Dance and keep them here so that local residents could come in, and if they have a check, and that's the only way we can do it, a check made out to Dr. Dance in the correct amount, we can act as a middle person and provide the book to them. And it might be advisable, if you're planning on doing that, to call before you come to make sure we have one for you, so that you won't make an unnecessary trip. So after April 1st, we will have a small supply here in the History Center for those who come in with a check made out to Dr. Dance. And without more, Dr. Dance, we're just excited to hear from you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your introduction. Thank you, Judy, for this invitation. Thanks to Nancy Falk also for all that she has done to make this program possible. And thank you to all my cousins and Charles City friends who have come out to hear me, and my children. I have talked about Ruthville School, Ruthville Community, Ruthville Post Office, Elam Church, Charles City County, Abraham Brown, all over the world, from California to Japan, from Canada to the Caribbean, from lowly prisons to magnificent embassies. But most of my audiences had never before heard of Ruthville or Elam or Charles City or Abraham. Thus, I'm more intimidated by those of you here today than I have ever been anywhere else all around the globe, because most of you know more about Ruthville and Elam and Charles City and Abraham than I do. Some of you have studied my subject more comprehensively than I have. Certainly, Judith Ledbetter is the unquestionable authority par excellence, the expert without peer on the history of Abraham. Most of you have heard as many, if not more, of the legends about Abraham and his descendants than I have. Many of you have actually contributed to my study. Many of you are of the lineage of Abraham. So today, audience and presenter are one and the same. I am here to talk about what I have tried to do with our story. I am here to thank many of you for making possible what I have tried to do with our story. And perhaps we'll hear from you some new versions of our story. I am here today to welcome your corrections to the story I have attempted to tell. And most importantly, I am here to celebrate with you our story, our heritage, and our beginnings. My life has been dedicated to seeking Abraham and the other ancestors, to completing an obsessive quest that one day left me so frustrated, exasperated, harried, and challenged that a poem came flowing out. And I want to share that poem with you. I call it My Debt to the Ancestors. I have spent a life listening to the tales of old people, searching through birth and death certificates, tax rolls, and voting records, poring over free papers, wills, and land transfers, reading trial records and Civil War claims, handling dusty books and turning crumbling pages, staring back at oversized pictures of ancients glaring down at me from the wall, and sassy flappers winking at me from the pages of a scrapbook. I have spent the last 20 years cutting and pasting, putting together scraps of memories and court records and haunting pictures, trying to create a collage of the ancestors to make them whole. But they seem unhappy with my collage. I sense they do not consider it authentic. They were not some pasted recreation of bits and pieces, some puzzle with visible cracks and missing parts. They were real, whole, three-dimensional, living, breathing, suffering, laughing individuals. They want to be remembered as they were. So now, doubly unhappy, they scowl at me from their pictures on the wall. I write and write, sweat and labor, look up at those pictures, still demanding more. I am tired of enduring their pains and sufferings, their humiliations and defeats. I am tired even of celebrating their victories and detailing their achievements. I twist and turn, move from one side of the room to the other, but accusing eyes follow me everywhere. It does not help to turn away from their gaze, to leave the room, even to gather up my notes and flee to Charlottesville, to California. Even in those distant places, voices of shadows whisper in my ear, insisting that I have yet more to do. What do you want of me, I plead? You are a ghost I do not know and have never seen. I have followed you from gravestones to distant cities and obscure archives. I have walked with you down country roads and university paths, even trailed you to bloody battlefields. I have waked, breathed, slept, and dreamed with you all these years. I have a life to lead. Let me be. And then finally, an epiphany. I cannot write about them, two self-contained individuals, one creating another. We're not separate beings, they the historical characters and I the objective scholar. No, the ancestors are me and I am them. And this is not my telling of their story. This is my effort to tell our story. Since writing that poem and completing the revised lineage of Abraham, I have indeed tried to respond further to the ancestors' desires to be portrayed as fuller, real, whole, three-dimensional, living, breathing, suffering, laughing individuals. I have written an historical novel focusing on them, Land of the Free Negroes. However, that will be the subject of another presentation, but perhaps time permitting, I'll read a bit of it to you today. Now, today, our focus is on this book, The Lineage of Abraham. I love the cover. I hope you can see it. Uh, there are in this book thousands of ancestors whose fascinating stories I might share, but I must start with Abraham, who motivated this quest. Abraham, who is the legendary family patriarch whose story countless African Americans throughout this nation passed on through generations in their family. Like most people of African descent in the colonies, Abraham was born in a racist land that limited his freedom, his education, his rights, his political participation, his economic possibilities. But Abraham had many advantages that most African Americans of the time did not have. He was born free. He was really Abraham Jr., a favorite son of an established family of some wealth. He inherited land and other property. He was an industrious and enterprising man, a farmer, a jack of all trades, an entrepreneur who grew even more prosperous. He and his wife, Susanna, had 11 children who would also begin life as heirs to property, some of which may well be some of the earliest property continually held by African American families in this nation. Abraham also clearly had some education, as he was at the forefront of the establishment, representation, and governance of one of the earliest independent Black churches in the nation. When he died, he left in his will a desk and some books. His enormous respect, even prestige, probably extended to the white world, for he traveled about to Richmond, to Petersburg, and elsewhere, selling his wares, trading in land and property, registering his freeborn children, and conducting his other business at the courthouse and doing the business of the church. He and his Elam relatives may well have been the only Negroes permitted to represent their own church in the Dover Association. It did not hurt that he was probably a light-skinned colored man, very likely indistinguishable from the white citizenry. Abraham frequently trod these very grounds upon which you and I have walked as we visited the Richard M. Bowman Center for Local History. Could Abraham have ever envisioned this impressive facility, these volumes of history here recorded, this virtual audience of accomplished citizens here in Charles City and elsewhere? Perhaps not, but he made it all possible. And I imagine that even as we trod upon some of the very same grounds that many of us have walked on many occasions, he had some inkling of the fulfillment of God's promise to his namesake. I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great. And in multiplying, I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven and as the sand which is upon the seashore. In my recently revised study in search of the origins of Abraham and my other ancestors in this nation, at the insistence and guidance of cousin Milton Z. Brown, I have gone back to the family of one, and you won't believe this name, one original Brown, a first-generation white American born of British parents. I have traced his ancestry back 5 more generations in England, but it is the American-born original who is of interest to me. And he is the subject at the beginning of my revised ancestral study. Like Abraham, original's name elicits biblical prophecy. So the last shall be first, and the first last. And so it is that a man named Original is the last in the European line of my ancestors and the father of the first of my African-American ancestors, one William Brown. Original, like his great-great-great-grandson Abraham, inherited land from his father. He was the son of 2 generations of indentured white servants from Britain to the colonies. Original built an estate through cheap labor provided by indentured servants and slaves. His is very much the story of white America. What is unique about original is his will. And so I will share with you a rather long portion of that even longer will while you look at our first PowerPoint picture of that will. In the name of God, amen. This fifth day of February, in the year of our Lord, 1697, I, original, being sick of body, but of perfect mind and memory. Can we move this one picture, please? I give and bequeath unto my son, William Brown, one riding horse, two saddles, bridle halter, one case of pistols, and a pair of holsters, one bayonet. I give unto my son, William Brown, one mare of 3 years, along with the increase. I give unto my son, William Brown, all my guns in general. I will that after my legacies are paid, that my son, William Brown, have the equal half of all my cattle with their increase. I will that my son, William Brown, have likewise half my stock of hogs and half my brass pewter and iron pots. I will that my son, William Brown, have one of my best tables with half of my table linen, half my chairs, and two of my best chests. I will that my son, William Brown, have my Bible and all the rest of my books. I give unto my son, William Brown, two Negroes named Coffee and Diana to be delivered to him at the full age of 21, with all their increase from this time to that. It is my will and pleasure that my well-beloved wife, Jane, be full and sole executress of this my last will and testimony. But if my said wife should in any case embezzle, make away, or strive to defraud my said children of any part or parcel of any of the mentioned legacies which I have given them, then it is my desire that my esteemed friend, Captain Lawrence Washington, and Mr. Caleb Butler, whom I empower and instruct as overseers of my children and their estates into their custody, and I desire my said two overseers carefully to look after my said children and their estate during the time of their minority. Incidentally, that Captain Lawrence Washington is the grandfather of President Washington, our first president. And so begins the story of my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, William, son of original, and great-great-grandfather of Abraham Jr. But one more flashback before we return to the seeds of original William and Abraham. Flashback. 4 years, and we can take the will down now. 4 years before original was born in Maryland, a mulatto named Manuel Cumbo, sometimes referred to as Emmanuel Cumbo, was appealing to the Virginia State Assembly for his freedom from slavery. An account in the Virginia Historical Magazine records that Manuel was bought as a slave forever. But in September 1644, the same servant was by the assembly adjudged no slave, but to serve as other Christian servants do, and was freed in September 1655. And thus begins my father's family in the colonies, with Manuel, very likely one of the early Africans brought to Virginia from Angola, and beginning another legendary line of a free Black family, one that retained its African name. Please note that Manuel sued for freedom in 1644, 16 years before what is often cited as the first freedom suit in the colonies, Elizabeth Key's suit in 1660. My father's line, too, begins with echoes of biblical prophecies. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet, saying, behold, a virgin shall be with child, and shall bring forth a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. These three ancestors, Emmanuel, Original, and Abraham, produced thousands of descendants who peopled this book, The Lineage of Abraham, several of whom have fascinating stories that deserve individual accounts. but time allows me today only to outline and summarize a few of their often pioneering achievements. From the Revolutionary period to the present, this family has served in record numbers in this nation's military. On our next slide, slide 3, we see names of the family, which can probably claim the greatest number of patriots in the Revolutionary War from one African-American family. There were 26 listed as colored from Charles City, several of them from Elam Church and this family. A number of members of this family were involved in the Civil War. There is significant documentation that they fought in the war, nursed and concealed Union soldiers, helped them escape, guided them, passed messages for them, and were put on trial for the same. In our next slide, we see Sylvanus Brown, who holds the unusual distinction of winning a pension from the state of Virginia for serving as a stable boy and body servant in the Confederate Army, and also winning acclaim from the United States for damages suffered as a supporter of the Union. May we see the slide of Sylvanus. The family pioneered in religion. Samuel Brown Sr. is described by A.B. Caldwell as the first ordained Negro Baptist preacher of Virginia. He was ordained in 1860 and served as pastor of Elam Baptist Church for 21 years. Andrew H. Cumber was the first professionally trained colored minister in New Kent County. The family also pioneered in education. Members of the family conducted what was likely the first classes for Blacks in Charles City before the Civil War ended. They later founded, built, and staffed 3 schools for Blacks. Members of the family helped found other schools, including the Fredericksburg Normal and Industrial High School and Norfolk State University. On slide 5, coming up now, we see Virginia Hall at Virginia State University. And I doubt that there's been another family that has been as involved in Virginia State as our family. My grandfather, Winston Bell, and a cousin in the line of Abraham were in the very first class that entered the originally named Virginia Normal and Collegiate Institute. 8 of my great or great-great aunts and uncles were enrolled in Virginia State between 1885 and 1901. 2 of my other grandparents studied there in the 19th century. My mother and I graduated from Virginia State, and well over 100 cousins, maybe even 200, attended Virginia State through the years. Members of the family have continuously worked there as faculty and staff. Our next slide shows my great aunt Ruth Hucles, who not only worked at Virginia State, studied at Virginia State, but she was celebrated as the oldest living graduate in 1957, for which Founders Day celebration, she wrote the fullest and only surviving account of daily life at the school in 1887. The next slide shows Aunt Ruth's daughter, Elaine Brown. Elaine was celebrated in 1994 at the age of 100 as the oldest surviving graduate, and it is Elaine who, with her husband, were part of the founding of Norfolk State. There is probably no Black family with a political record surpassing ours. Our family included the 3 who were the first members of the Virginia House of Delegates: A.Q. Franklin, William Patterson, and William H. Brisby. William Sanford Brown was the first Black man on the Charles City Board of Supervisors during Reconstruction. James Wittenberg notes that the Brown family had several of the earliest Black local officials, including surveyor, election official, justice of the peace, magistrate, and member of the Board of Supervisors. In our next slide, we see A.Q. Franklin, who was the first Black elected to the post of Commissioner of the Revenue, a difficult post for a Black man to obtain because it required that he post $5,000 bond. Franklin served for 2 terms. Members of Abraham's family continued to vote during the early 20th century when some Southern jurisdictions had no Black voters. In 1961, Blacks in Charles City constituted a higher percentage of local electorate than they did in any other county in the nation. And during the 1960s, they held more political power than Blacks in any other part of the South. Years before the Voting Rights Act, Charles City had Blacks on most boards and in a few offices. Blacks who served in substantial numbers on juries. And Charles City even had integrated areas of the courthouse except the restrooms. Next, we see a slide of W.H.C. Brown, who was the only Negro who attended the Republican State Convention in Roanoke in 1905, and there he made a seconding speech for Judge L.L. Lewis for governor. W.H.C. Brown may have been one of the first lawyers in Virginia. He was responsible for the establishment of the Ruthville Post Office, probably the earliest post office established at the behest of Blacks in a Black community. It is certainly the only one that the United States Commission of Civil Rights found in the southern counties in the Black Belt that it studied between 1959 and 1961 that had a Negro serving as a postmistress. It was also, we think, the first post office named for African Americans. In the next slide, we see Oliver White Hill, husband of Abraham's great-great-great-granddaughter, Beresenia Walker Hill, pictured here with him. Hill led the fight in landmark civil rights cases in Virginia, included winning the right to serve on grand juries, protection of firemen and other railroad workers in rights to employment and to fair and impartial representation, the right of participation in primary elections, the elimination of segregation on common carriers, the use of public facilities in a non-discriminatory and unsegregated fashion, and many others, including educational cases. He literally changed the lives of most of us here today even, and certainly in mid-20th century. In 1948, he became the first Black American to win a seat on the Richmond City Council, and Hill was presented the Presidential Medal of Freedom on August 11, 1999. One of Hill's cases in 1930s involved the Charles City County Teachers Association's battle to equalize teachers' salaries. The group was organized by three descendants of Abraham: Wilnett Carter, Lois Jones, and Cordelia Banks. This was one of the cases that finally led to pay equalization for teachers in 1948. Slide 11 shows us Doug Wilder, who would cap the family's political achievements by becoming the first Black Virginia senator since Reconstruction, the first Black Southern lieutenant governor since Reconstruction, and the first Black elected governor in the United States. Later achievement in education are no less striking, with members of the family being the first teachers, supervisors, and principals in Charles City and elsewhere. Abraham's descendants were among the early Black graduates from Harvard, UVA, and other prestigious American universities. Slide 12 shows us Charles Christian, who was the first Black professor in the medical college at VCU. Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot was the first African-American woman in Harvard's history to have an endowed professorship named in her honor. The family has produced an unusual number of professors, writers, scientists, engineers, lawyers, judges, and doctors. Family legend insists that more Black doctors of the 20th century came out of this family than any other American city. I don't know how to begin to check this, but I do know you could walk down less than a mile on my country road and pass home sites of one family that produced 6 medical professionals and 4 families that produced at least 2 doctors. From the time of Reconstruction to the present, this family has produced countless entrepreneurs, established businesses such as taverns, restaurants, printing companies, security systems, funeral homes, employment agencies, travel agencies, magazines, boutiques, event planning agencies, automobile dealerships, an airline company, and the first Black-owned business on Martha's Vineyard. Members of this family are credited with founding the first African-American banks in Newport News, Washington, D.C., and Boston. Abraham's descendants have also made pioneering achievements in sports. The next slide shows us what is perhaps the best known basketball team in the history of Black colleges, and that's Virginia Union's Dream Team. That legendary team, generally recognized as the best Black team in the country from 1939 to 1942, proved they were the best when they played and defeated Long Island University, which had just won the National Invitational Tournament. Of course, Union wasn't allowed to play in the tournament. One member of the team was the great-great-great-great-grandson-in-law of Abraham, Garnett Blair, and the team was coached by Abraham's great-great-great-grandson, Dr. Henry B. Euclides Jr., football and basketball coach at Virginia Union University, then college. Euclides played in the Negro Baseball League with the Homestead Grays of Pittsburgh. He played, they were the Eastern champions in 1930 and 31. They were the Negro National League champions in 1937 to 1945 and 1948, and the Negro World Series champions in 1943, 1944, and 1948. Finally, these players in the Negro League are about to at least receive some of the recognition that they deserved when they had to play in a segregated league. The next slide shows my husband, Warren C. Dance Sr., posthumously elected to the Armstrong High School Hall of Fame in 2018, where he was praised as the greatest all-around athlete in the school history. He was co-captain of the Armstrong High School's undefeated championship football team of 1953 and a star on the basketball and baseball teams at Armstrong. In June of 2021, my husband will be inducted into the Virginia Sports Hall of Fame. Keisha Lindsay Brown is the youngest girl ever to play basketball in the U.S. Olympic Festival, having been selected in 1995 when she was 16. In 1996, she won the Naismith Award for being the #1 high school basketball player in the nation. She went on to play basketball at the University of Georgia. Another woman athlete, Angela Kalia Euclides, graduated Norfolk Academy in 1996 as the all-time leading soccer scorer with 204 goals and 106 assists. She went on to play at UVA from 1996 to 1999, where she became UVA women's all-time leader in goals with 59, the all-time leader in game-winning goals with 19, and the all-time leader in total points with 138. She was a member of 2 Olympic gold-winning teams and finished 3rd in 2 World Cups. Her biggest role with the squad came in the 2008 Summer Olympics, where she led the U.S. team with 4 goals, 2 of which came in the semifinal victory over Japan. She was recently inducted into the Virginia Sports Hall of Fame. VSU professor and administrator Linda Person was named CIAA Tennis Coach of the Year 7 times. And in the next slide, we see my son, Alan Cumber Dance, who was the first to run varsity on VCU's cross-country program for 4 years, the first African-American team captain, and the first to be captain for 2 seasons. Next, we see my grandson, Joseph Dance, who became the first African American on the golf team at Drexel University in 2013. He served as captain 2 years and won numerous sports and academic awards. And next, we see my granddaughter, Veronica Cumber, dance. At the age of 13 and suffering from leg injuries, she received national attention when she won a contest before a VCU game, during which she, in fewer than 35 seconds, made a layup, a free throw, a three-point shot, and a half-court shot. I'll move on from sports to conclude with a few other notable pioneers in a number of fields. The next slide shows Ethel Madison Bailey Carter, who was the first Black woman to be licensed as an architect in the state of Virginia. The next slide shows Yvette Brown Ridley, who was hired in 1943 as a computer engineer for NACA, the predecessor of NASA, making her one of the first African-American women to be hired at NASA at NACA and then NASA as a computer engineer. William T. Stone of Williamsburg, Virginia, was hailed as the first American judge in Virginia when he was appointed in Williamsburg in 1968. Ruth Brown Blair was the first Black policewoman, and we have a picture of her. No, we don't. First Black policewoman in Richmond, hired in December 17, 1949. And then Anna Jane Franklin was the first Black woman enrolled in the University of Virginia Medical School in 1956. Slide 21 shows Thomas. Oh, we did have a picture of Ruth Brown, yes, the first policewoman in Richmond. And the next slide shows a picture of Thomas E. Brown, the first Black fire chief in DeKalb County, Georgia, and the youngest fire chief in the nation when he was appointed at the age of 35 in 1985. And many of us here know Michelle Johnson, who became the first female to hold the position of county administrator in Charles City. That was 2017. As most of you know, one of our early national journalists was Charles City's own Spencer Christian. But the journalist with the truly incredible story in the family was Robert O. Bob Brown, also called Gory Brown, because he fearlessly filmed so many bloody stories. He covered the war protests in Berkeley, the Juan Corona serial murders, the Vietnamese War, where his helicopter was shot down. He covered the shootout police had with Symbionese liberation members who had kidnapped Patty Hearst. And finally, he covered the Jonestown Massacre, where he was killed when the Americans who went to Guyana to investigate Jim Jones's People's Temple were attacked by Jones's followers. Brown was shot in the leg and fell to the ground, but he continued filming until he was executed with a bullet to his head, camera still running, leaving the only video account of the final moments of that attack. Described by Kevin Fagan in the San Francisco Chronicle as one of the most grimly riveting video clips in history. Gory Brown is not treated in my book because I learned about him only after the book's release. Stories like the lineage of Abraham are never complete. They have no real beginning nor end. The family has received some notice and acclaim. At least 20 books have been written on members of this family, and about 25 public schools and other buildings bear their names. The L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs at VCU is one of the rare schools at a major American university named after an African American. Oliver Hill has been memorialized with 2 statues, one of which is the first statue of African Americans on the Virginia Capitol grounds. And the site of our lecture today is named in honor of another descendant of Abraham. I cannot speak about my debt to the ancestors without highlighting him. And so today, as I conclude, I want to offer a grateful tribute to Richard M. Bowman, Charles City's own legendary griot, my treasured friend and insightful consultant whose generous support helped to make the lineage of Abraham possible. Thank you, Richard. This lecture is dedicated to you. And thank you, all my cousins and friends and neighbors and relatives for being a part of our audience today. And I am looking forward to you sharing your experiences, making your observation, and perhaps asking some questions or making some corrections. Thank you all very much.